Chapter 11. The Herder's Secret. Truchas grinned as Ricky hurried toward him and the burros. "So the plane cracked up, eh?" he teased. "Burros never break a propeller, and they don't run out of gasoline. I'll stick to burros." "I guess I will too," said Ricky. "May I ride one home all alone?" "Well, son, we'll see how Mr. Vega's gonna arrange things," the sheep herder answered. "Maybe we'll have to double up." By this time, everybody was talking excitedly. "You made good time, Truchas," Mr. Vega praised him. "Guess I did," the old man answered. "My burros can make better time than a jeep, too. I beat Mr. Hollister getting here." Mr. Vega laughed. "By knowing all the shortcuts and going in and out of the arroyos," he said. He had hardly finished speaking when they heard the distant hum of a motor, and presently Mr. Hollister drew up and stopped. He looked unbelievingly at Truchas and the burros. "You must have a magic carpet," he chuckled. "I've got magic mules," the old man answered proudly. Mr. Vega suggested that as soon as they had all had breakfast from supplies Truchas had brought, the herder take the children home. He and Mr. Hollister would see what they could do with the plane. While eating, Pete said to the ranch owner, "May I report to the police that maybe your stolen sheep were shipped on the railroad to Kansas City?" "I'd rather you wire the stockyard in Kansas City direct," Mr. Vega said. "I'll leave it to you and Diego to take care of the matter." "All aboard the burros!" Truchas' voice rang out, and Mr. Vega helped the children onto the backs of the friendly little animals. Sue was to ride in front of Truchas. Each of the others would have a burro to himself. "Aren't we going to take the lamb and the dogie?" Pam spoke up. "Oh yes, I nearly forgot them," said Dolores. "I want to have the dogie walk behind me," Ricky announced, and ran to get the little animal, who was grazing. Truchas went to look at the young calf. "There's no brand mark on him, Mr. Vega," he said, "so I suppose we can take him along." The sheep herder explained to the Hollisters that unbranded cattle sometimes roam the range and belong to whomever found them. Holly lifted the lamb and laid the animal across the burro in front of her. The little band started off, with Truchas in the lead and Pete bringing up the rear on Domingo. Up and down the hills they went, when suddenly Holly asked in surprise, "Dolores, who gave this lamb chewing gum?" "Chewing gum?" Dolores exclaimed with a giggle. "Nobody!" "Well, the lamb is chewing something," Holly insisted. "She's chewing her cud," Diego explained, smiling. "I thought only cows did that," Holly said, a little embarrassed. "Sheep do too," Dolores added, as the little group stopped to let the Hollister children observe the woolly animal. Diego grinned. "Sheep have 4 stomachs, you know. When they graze, the food goes into one of their stomachs. Then it comes back into their mouths and they chew it some more before swallowing it again." "That's keen," Ricky piped up. "Then they could eat all day long." "You'd make a good lamb," said Pam, joking with her brother. "Dad says you have 2 hollow legs, and that's why Mother can't fill you up." After they had watched the lamb chew the cud for a while, and were about to set off again, Sue pursed her lips and said sadly, "I really feel sorry for lammies." "Why?" Dolores asked. "'Cause they can get 4 tummy aches. I only get 1 and that's bad enough." Everybody laughed as they went along, which made the time pass quickly. After they had ridden for another hour, the riders came to the top of a small hill. "I see the buildings of Cottonwood Ranch," Ricky shouted, pointing. As the burro train wound up to the ranch house, Mrs. Hollister and Mrs. Vega rushed out to meet them. "Thank goodness all of you were safe," Mrs. Hollister exclaimed, as she lifted Sue from the burro and hugged her. "And where did you get these babies?" she asked, seeing the lamb and the dogie. "Oh, they're orphans," said Holly, "and they're going to live with us." She went off with Pam and Dolores to put the lamb in a pen, until the little orphan could be taken into a herd. Ricky led the dogie to another one. While this was going on, Pete and Diego helped Truchas wipe off and stable the burros. Finally, the old man called Ricky, Holly, and Sue into a little private conference. After he had talked a few minutes, Sue began to bob her head vigorously. "Of course I can keep a secret," she maintained. Giggling, she added, "This is an orphan secret." "What's going on?" Pam called. "Can't tell you yet," Holly answered. The others did not tease to know what the secret was, and the two older boys ran into the house. They went at once to the telephone with the intention of sending a telegram through the Sunrise office. But Diego was unable to get the operator. "It's out of order, I guess," he said. "We'll have to give it up and drive to town. We'll take the truck and ask Truchas to go along." He spoke to his mother, who gave her consent, and the boys hurried off to find the herder. At first the old man did not seem interested and said he preferred waiting until the plane came back. But when he heard about the telegram, Truchas said he would accompany the boys. Diego ran into the garage and backed the truck into the yard. When Pete saw him do this, his eyes grew wide. "Can kids drive cars out here?" he asked. Diego explained that the Western boys learned to drive cars at an early age because they helped on the ranches. Diego kept the wheel until they reached the public highway. Then Truchas slid into the driver's seat. When they arrived at Sunrise, the herder pulled up to the curb and parked. He said he would meet the boys in half an hour. As they started off, Diego said, "The telegraph office is down the street. We'll send the message right away." Before they reached it, the boys passed a shop that sold men's clothing. Suddenly, Pete grabbed Diego's arm. "Look in there," he said excitedly. Diego gave a low whistle. "What do you know about that?" he said. Near the front of the store stood Mesquite Mike, trying on a new 10-gallon hat. "That proves to me it was his old one we found in the arroyo," Pete declared. Then he whispered, "Diego, you send the telegram and I'll trail Mesquite Mike. Maybe I can learn something." "Okay. If I don't see you, I'll meet you at the car." Pete slipped into an alleyway and watched for the cowboy to come out. In a few minutes, he came from the shop wearing the new hat and swaggered down the street in the opposite direction. Like a detective, Pete was right after him. Mesquite Mike walked the full length of the street without looking back. Then he turned a corner and set off toward a group of rather shabby one-story buildings with boxes and cans scattered about untidily. Reaching the last house, he knocked on the door. It was opened and he went in. Maybe I'd better tell the police, Pete thought, as he hid himself behind a large carton so the man would not see him if he should look out a window. Before he had a chance, the door opened and the man came out. But he was no longer wearing the new hat. Mesquite Mike had changed to an older one. "I wonder if that's his," Pete said to himself, "or did he borrow it?" The cowboy walked toward the open country to where a saddled horse was grazing. Mesquite swung into the saddle and rode off. Pete was curious to learn who lived in the house where the man had stopped. Seeing a little boy come out of another, he asked him. "Willie Boot and his mother live there," the boy answered, "but Willie's not home much." "He's with Mesquite Mike a lot, isn't he?" Pete prodded the child, who said his name was Stan. "Yes, but I'm kind of scared of Mike." "Why?" "He tells us awful stories about stampedes and things," Stan replied. "He knows how to cut out cattle and rope 'em, and..." As the lad paused, Pete asked him if Mesquite ever talked about sheep, and whether he knew a lot about them, too. "Sure he does," the boy answered. Though Pete asked Stan several other questions, he could not find out anything damaging to the cowboy. If he were a rustler, he had kept his secret well. "I don't like Willie either," Stan said. "He takes our toys." At this moment, Stan's mother called him and he ran off. Pete walked back toward the car, thinking hard about what he had just heard. Neither Truchas nor Diego was there, so Pete went to the telegraph office. Inside, Diego was seated at a little desk that had a pencil chained on top of it. His telegram read, "Manager, Kansas City Stockyard. About 25 sheep with Vega mark may have been shipped to market within past week by Rustler. Please reply. D. Vega, Sunrise." After giving the message to the man at the counter, Diego paid for it. Then the boys walked out. At once, Pete explained that he had learned where Willie Boot lived and what Stan had told him about Mesquite. "I'm convinced he's been taking the sheep," Pete concluded. "And maybe Willie helped him," Diego suggested. Then suddenly he exclaimed, "Jumping bullfrogs, look at that!" He pointed across the street. Walking along were Jack and Helen Moore, and with them, chatting in a very friendly fashion, was Willie Boot. "Well, I'll be a gopher," Diego said. "I thought you told me the Moores didn't have any use for Willie Boot."